My name is Paige Eisner. I am 34 years old, and my mother once told me that family is a circle you never break. But she forgot to mention that a circle can also be a noose, tightening every time you try to breathe for yourself. To understand how I ended up on a church floor on Christmas Eve, you have to understand the night the world went quiet. It was 2017, a damp November Saturday in Hartford. I was 26, a fresh graduate of the RN program, finally feeling like I was standing on my own 2 feet. I was 10 weeks pregnant, a secret I carried like a porcelain bird, fragile and terrifying. The father was a ghost who had packed his life into a duffel bag and vanished while I was on a double shift, leaving nothing but a text message that said, "Sorry," and a dial tone where his life used to be. I was heating a bowl of tomato soup at 11 p.m. when the knife hit. That's the only way to describe the pain of a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. A cold, sharp blade twisting in your gut until your vision goes white. I remember the smell of the soup burning on the stove as I crawled toward my car keys. I remember the steering wheel feeling like ice under my palms as I drove myself to the ER, my scrub pants already heavy and dark with blood. When the triage nurse saw me, her face went into that professional mask I now wear every day, the one that says, "Don't panic," which is exactly when you should. As they prepped the gurney, I reached for my phone. I called my mother, Linda. I expected the sound of her bedroom, the quiet hum of the late-night news. Instead, I heard a wall of sound, music, the high-pitched trill of my sister Brooke's laughter, and the unmistakable clinking of crystal. "Mom," I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm in the ER. They're taking me to surgery. I'm losing the baby. Please, can you come?" There was a pause. Not a pause of concern, but a pause of calculation. I could hear Brooke in the background asking who it was, and then my mother's voice, sharp and annoyed. "Paige, don't be dramatic. Brooke's engagement party has 50 guests waiting. I can't just walk out. It would be a scandal. The doctors are there, they know what they're doing. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow." Then, the click. The loudest sound I have ever heard. I went into that surgery holding the hand of a stranger named Karen, a nurse who whispered that I wasn't alone, while my own mother was choosing a tray of appetizers over my life. I woke up in a room that smelled of floor wax and missed opportunities. The chair by the window was empty. The tray on the bedside table held nothing but a cup of lukewarm water and a discharge paper. 3 days later, Linda finally called. She didn't ask about the surgery. She didn't ask if I was grieving. Her first words were a warning. "I hope you aren't planning to use this to guilt trip us, Paige. The party was a triumph, and Brooke is finally happy." That was the moment I died to them. I hung up the phone, walked to the nurse's station, and began the process of erasing myself. I changed my number that afternoon. I filed for a transfer to a community clinic 4 hours south, in a town where the name Eisner didn't carry the weight of pillar of the community. I deactivated every digital trace of my existence. I moved into a studio apartment that had a view of a brick wall and a draft that rattled the windows, and I started over. I worked 36-hour shifts. I lived on black coffee and the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. I became a nurse practitioner, studying in the basements of libraries until the sun came up. I thought I was alone. I told myself that the $200 that appeared in my account every month was part of a rural healthcare grant. I wrote thank you letters to a faceless board of directors, never realizing the board was a man sitting in a garage in Hartford, listening to baseball on a portable radio and crying. For 8 years, I built a spine out of the wreckage. I adopted a cat named Olive who didn't care about my past. I made friends who knew me as Paige the NP, not Paige the disappointment. But the silence wasn't empty. It was being filled by my mother's imagination. Through my Aunt Helen, the only one who dared to keep my address, I learned the narrative Linda was spinning. To the world, I hadn't left because of her cruelty. I had left because I was unstable. She told the congregation at Grace Community Church that I had been diagnosed with a severe personality disorder. She turned my survival into her tragedy, hosting prayer circles for her troubled daughter. She was the martyr, and I was the cautionary tale. She had written letters to the pastor, documented lies in the church registry, and ensured that if I ever did come back, the truth would be buried under a mountain of medical fiction. She didn't just lose a daughter, she curated a ghost. Then came last Christmas Eve. The snow was falling in thick, silent flakes that muffled the sound of the world. I had just finished a grueling shift at the clinic. Flu season is a thief of time. And I was pouring a glass of wine when the doorbell rang. Standing there was a girl with dark blonde hair and a red bow that was slightly crooked. Lily, my niece, a person I had only seen in the peripheral of my mind. She handed me a leather-bound album, its spine cracked and held together by a fading rubber band. "Grandpa said to give this to you," she said. When I opened that book, the air left the room. It wasn't just a photo album. It was a ledger of a father's witness. There were photos of my NP graduation, taken from the very back row of the auditorium, so far away that I was just a speck in a cap and gown. My father had been there. There were photos of me at the grocery store, me walking to my car, me laughing with a coworker. He had been watching me for 8 years, not as a stalker, but as a man who was too afraid to speak, but too loving to leave. Inside were 5 unmailed Christmas cards, each one an apology for his silence. "Dear Paige," one read, "I'm sorry I'm not brave enough to send this. Your mother checks the phone bills, she checks the mail, but I see you. You are doing so well." The last page was the photocopy of the letter to Pastor Thomas, the one where my mother called me a danger to myself. Helen arrived shortly after Lily, her face pale with the weight of the news. My father was in the hospital, blockage in his heart, surgery scheduled for the 26th. He had sent Lily and the album because he didn't know if he'd make it to the 27th to tell me himself. But there was one more thing. Linda was at the church at that very moment, organizing the Christmas Eve service. She was scheduled to give a speech on family forgiveness. The irony was a physical weight in my chest. I looked at Lily, then at the album, and then at the clock. It was 7:30 p.m. I didn't change out of my scrubs. I didn't fix my hair. I put on my coat, grabbed the album and drove. Walking into Grace Community Church felt like walking into a trap I had escaped years ago. The smell of frankincense and expensive perfume was suffocating. I sat in the very last row, the back row, my father's row. Up at the altar, Linda was a vision in red silk, her voice trembling with the perfect amount of rehearsed grief. "Christmas is about the lost sheep," she told the 60 people watching her with teary eyes. "We pray for my daughter, Paige, every day. We leave the door open, but the darkness in her mind keeps her away." I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. The room went cold. Linda saw me, and for 3 seconds, her mask shattered. Then the performance resumed. "My baby, you've come home," she cried, rushing down the aisle with her arms open for a hug that was meant to be a chokehold. She whispered in my ear, "Don't you dare make a scene. Smile, or I'll have you removed." I stepped back. I opened the album and placed it on the back of a pew. "I didn't come for a reunion, Mom. I came because Dad asked me to." I read the letter she wrote to the pastor. I read it in my clinical voice, the one that doesn't shake. I showed the people the photos of my father standing alone in the snow just to see me. I showed them the bank receipts of the money he had to hide from her just to help his daughter survive. The silence in that church was the sound of 60 people realizing they were the audience for a monster. My brother-in-law, Derek, stood up and finished it. He admitted he had heard the phone call 8 years ago. He admitted that Brooke had told Linda not to go to the hospital because the guests were arriving. Linda didn't apologize. She didn't break. She looked at the room of people who had turned away from her, called us all ungrateful, and walked out of the heavy oak doors into the night. She left alone, and for the first time in my life, I felt the sun come out in December. I spent Christmas Day in room 412. My father, Richard, looked smaller than I remembered, hooked up to monitors that beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. We didn't need a lot of words. I held his hand, and he cried. The first time I had ever seen a man of his generation let the dam break. He told me he had filed for legal separation. He had spent months secretly working with a lawyer to move his pension and assets into a trust for me and Lily, ensuring that Linda could never use money as a leash again. I should have been braver, he whispered. I told him that showing up in the back row for 8 years was a kind of bravery I finally understood. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it is mine. I still live in my drafty apartment, but now there are drawings of me and Lily pinned to the fridge. My father is recovering, and we have Sunday dinner every week. People ask me if I've forgiven my mother. I tell them that forgiveness is a process of clearing out the rent-free residence in your head, and I'm still doing the housework. I haven't spoken to her and I don't need to. I've learned that blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Walking away from a toxic house isn't a mental health crisis. It's a rescue mission. If you are sitting in a back row somewhere, feeling invisible, I want you to know that someone sees you. I see you. And you deserve to walk up to the front, take a seat at the table you built for yourself, and finally, breathe. My name is Paige Eisner, and I am no longer a ghost.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stories.